So in this second video, we're going to draw the residual plots, a box plot of the residuals, and a normal probability plot of the residuals to assess the adequacy of the model found in Part E. This regression equation up here is our model. So first, let's create the box plot. I'm sorry, the residual plot. So if we go back to StatCrunch, right, this was our data from the previous problem. I can press stat regression. Now it's going to be simple linear because we only have one variable. We had x1 and y. And if we scroll down, we have some items we can tick off here. Residuals versus x values. I press compute. And here's some data, but if I press the arrow that will move the to the second page, you see this is page 1 of 2. So I press the right arrow to get to page 2, and here are my residuals. Now this might look different than what's shown in my stat lab. Notice my x-axis goes from 4,000 to looks like 10,000, and from negative 100 to positive 100 in the y direction. Notice their axis goes from negative 160 to positive 160. So we can actually just click on the axis and just change my minimum to go from negative 160 to positive 160. And it's going to redraw our graph. And perhaps this will look a little bit better or a little bit closer to what you see for your choices. All right, so it looks like A is out. I think B could be our winner, right? Because it definitely doesn't look like C. And graph D, most of our items are above 0. And when I look at our graph, it looks like some things are above 0, some are below, and that's kind of what we want, right? Like, imagine throwing confetti up in the air. It's just going to scatter everywhere. So I'm going to select letter B. And we get the check mark. So we move on. Now we have to do a box plot. So again, let's go back to StatCrunch. So in StatCrunch, I guess this was our previous problem. If I press Options, Edit, right, we already had residuals versus x values, but down here where it says Save, I can actually save the residuals. I press Compute. And now you see here's a new column titled Residuals. I can press Graph, Box Plot, and then I'm going to do a box plot of my residuals. And I want the to make it look like what we see in StatCrunch, I think we want this, instead of going vertically, we want to draw the boxes horizontally. I think that's everything. So I press Compute. And here is my box plot. Again, notice where 0 is. Doesn't look like we have any outliers. So you notice we have an outlier on both sides. So it looks like letter A is going to be our choice. And we get the check mark. I press Continue. And then the last thing we need is a normal probability plot of the residuals. We have two options here. I'm going to close out our box plot. We can actually press Graph and go down to QQ plot and then use our residuals. And I think this would work. The other option was clicking Edit on our previous box when we did our simple linear regression. Instead of doing residuals versus an x value, we could have just selected QQ plots right here and then press the right arrow. And we should have two graphs that are pretty much similar, right? These are identical. So either one would work. So it looks like ours was somewhat linear with a positive slope from left to right, right? Letter B doesn't look like what we've drawn. Letter C and letter D, the slope is incorrect. So I'm going to select A. Check answer, and we look pretty good. So then I press Continue. It says, which of the graphs show inadequacy in the model? Actually, none of them, right? There are no outliers for the box plot. The residuals, it should look like, I think the example they always use in the book is you're throwing confetti up in the air and it's spread out. So that our residuals, this looks like confetti thrown out in the air. And for a normal probability plot, right, it appears somewhat linear within bounds. So I think they all look pretty good. And we get the check mark. So I'm going to stop here, and I'll continue with a third video to answer letter G and so on.